All right, today we're going to look at keys. We'd already talked about keys in the beginning series about music theory, that we had talked about key signature, what that means, and playing in key. So we've already gone through all that about what key is. When you're looking at, if we go back through and just kind of review it, the only thing that we kind of want to talk about is exotic keys or exotic scales. Sometimes your notation software, you can get into your notation software and find some way to build exotic keys and scales, and sometimes you won't. You'll have to actually define the scale at the beginning. So instead of there being a key signature there at the first measure here, you might have to define the scale and as a key. It would basically mean build the scale or sharpen flat the notes, by hand, and without having an actual key signature to assign. Like if you're dealing with a harmonic minor or something like that, that's got the augmented fifth, you might have to go up there and use the augmented fifth and augment the fifth, sharp it, for that scale. That's a very simple concept, and make some text notation about it if you're using any kind of exotic scale that's not just found in your software. And that's pretty simple to do and fairly easy. When we just talked about that, just write it out. The other thing we wanted to talk about, I guess we'll go through just a little bit of a review. We've already discussed it, and so basically looking at the staff, we defined on the keyboard, we went through it and looked at the keyboard, and we defined the notes, and we defined key from looking at on the keyboard and from this paper here, and we basically defined it pretty well in those videos. But we'll go back and kind of review it. And basically the biggest things to keep in mind, there's a couple concepts that are very pertinent. The first concept is relative major and minor, and we talked about that, to where if you're dealing with the relative major and minor, that the concept isn't difficult. And what you're doing is, if you're playing in C, that we're playing in the key of C, and its relative minor is 3 half steps down. 1 half step, another half step, another half step, and it's A minor, but with the same notes as the key of C. Or if you're an A minor and you're going to go 3 half steps up to C, then that would be A minor's relative major. And that's a very simple concept to understand, so that if you're looking at this and you're seeing that concept's very, very simple. And we discussed that. The other thing that we wanted to talk about is that when you're looking, you've got a key signature here, like let's say this key signature, any key signature, that any of the notes along that staff are going to be automatically sharp or flat, to where if you're looking like it this here and it's key of G, F is going to be automatically sharp all throughout the entire piece, unless you put a natural sign. If you're playing along and you have an F that you want to play that you don't want sharp, you put a natural sign in front of it. And on the next following F, it's good practice to put another sharp sign in front of it to let whoever's reading it know that you don't want that natural again, that you're going back to the key signature. Most of the time they'll say if it goes to the next measure, it automatically goes back to whatever key you're working in. So it automatically go back to that F being sharp. But it's good practice just to notate it, just so the person somehow is going along and he doesn't think, well, that's supposed to be natural, because now I know he went back to the key signature because he sharped it again, and then it's automatically sharp throughout the rest of the piece unless I see another natural sign. That's a very simple concept to get through your head. And so the sharps and flats are very simple. These keys down here, the B, the C flat, the F sharp, the G flat, the D flat, and the C sharp, you really want to familiarize with these. There's a whole lot of sharps and flats going on down there, and you basically want to just review it and review it and review it and really familiarize yourself with that, because the understanding of that is that those key signatures may not come up a lot in what you're doing. Sometimes they may, but them and their relative minors you want to really familiarize yourself with. The other concept we want to talk about is finding what key it is, finding the key. If it's a flat key, the second flat sign back from the far right flat sign is the named flat key. So if you go to here, and this is B flat, you can see that the last farthest to the right is that E. It's on that space, so it's E flat. So the one back from that is going to be the name of that key signature. So it's on the B line on the staff, so it's going to be B flat. Just remember that whenever you're looking at any flats. And on sharps, it'll be the half step above that, one half step above far right sharp sign is the named key. So like here on this G, really simply, it's right on that F. It's right on that F line on the treble staff there. And so one half step up is going to be that space, which is going to be G. So the key signature is going to be G. So you don't have to worry about there's so many flats or so many sharps that this here, you're going to look at this, and you're going to be looking at that, and you're going to go one half step above that sharp sign is that B line, so it's going to be the key of B. And you're going to go here, and you're going to go, the next one back that's marked from the right is going to be what? C flat. So the key is going to be C flat. That's a very simple concept to understand. And the other concept we want to talk about is building a key, so you can write it out. And that's very simple. If you're building a sharp key, you want to start with the F sharp on that line here, and you want to mark that one F sharp, and you want to go down 3 lines and spaces, down 3, and then you want to mark that sharp. And then you want to go up 4 lines and spaces and mark that sharp until the key signature is the one half step above that. The next, so you'd be looking here, and you'd be started on this F sharp, went down 3, went up 4, and then a half step above that G is A, and that's the key that you're trying to write for. So then that would be the key signature of A. Or you can do that backwards and start with whatever key you're trying to write in. And with B, or with flats, you want to start with B flat. You want to start with B flat, and you can see on the key F here, the first flat sign is on the B line. Then you want to go up 3 line spaces, mark that one flat. Then you want to go down 4 lines and spaces and mark that one flat. And you can do that forward or backwards, however you want to see it. If you're going to do E flat, you can start with E flat, and then and you know, from here, and know that you got to go down. It's that can be a little bit confusing, so sometimes it's better just to start and work through the process up to where you're going to until you get familiar with it. The more familiar you get with it, the easier that will come. And so we've basically talked about that's basically dealing with the keys. There's not a whole lot else going on unless you're dealing with like you know, the bass, the bass clef, the F clef, and not the G clef, that, you know, you can see that they're marked different. Here it's going to be, this one is marked here, and so you can see how it's marked. The first one's F, and this one here is C, right? Correct? So down here, the first one would be F, would be right there on the F clef, and then C would be down here. So that just takes a little bit getting used to, because they'll be marked, they'll look different at different places on the staff because of what the marker on the treble clef is G, the marker on this clef is F, plus the notes are in different spots. You know, we talked about that in key and looking at the staff, that they're in different places. The C here is going to be there, and the C on this staff is going to be here. And that's a very simple concept to understand. And if you look at really simple, there's F is going to be there on this where the F clef is on the bass clef, and the F is actually going to be this top line up here, or it's going to be down here. Does that make sense? And the G clef, same deal. It's going to be somewhere else on the marking, or on the in the lines and in the spaces. And that just takes getting used to. But that's basically all we really needed to cover. We've already talked about all these concepts so that we can understand when we're looking at a key. The biggest and hardest part of dealing with key signatures is being able to remember what's sharp and flat. And that comes to really being familiar with the scale you're dealing with. And dealing with, if like you're playing here the C major scale, and we talked about that. So you're playing the C major scale, and you know you're starting to C, and it goes to C, and it's all the white notes. Well, when you play here and you're playing in G, and you're starting with the G note, well, you're going to go through it, but guess what? All of the F's are going to be sharped. Why? Because that's the 7th. So all the F's will be sharp because it's a half step up to the root again. So you'd be going through all those, but then to get back to G, you're not going to hit this F, you're going to hit the F sharp, and you're going to go up to G. So that's a very simple concept to understand, and it wouldn't take you long once you start getting used to it to understand if you're playing in G, you know what tonal chords you can play, and we've talked some about that, and to not play this white note, play that black note, and then you go back to the G, and there's going to be that one black note in that key. And whatever instrument you're playing, I play the guitar. I mean, my main instrument is the guitar. So I have to learn a different way. That the best way I learned to do it was with modes. That way that I don't have to sit around. I know the notes on my fretboard, but I don't sit around and have to worry about that. On the piano, you've got some color references, where on the guitar, sometimes you just don't. And you really have to look at what note you're going to. And so I'll reference, the modes come to my eye faster than what note. You know, I mean, going, that's an F or an F sharp. And my mind will automatically reference the mode I'm in and see that rather than looking at the note. I mean, I know what note it is, but the modes basically lay it out for you so that you can see it without having to actually reference the actual every note on the fretboard. And the same thing with the keyboard, that it's a kind of works the same way as a visual reference, that you remember that black key is going to get played and not this white one, and then you're playing in the key of G, and it's that simple. But those are some simple concepts to get through your head. The understanding, the other concepts that are going to happen when you're playing in key is that it's going to be different. The chords are going to be played different. So you'd have G major, and then you'd have G major, then you would have A minor, and it would go, you understand the basic chord progression of a major scale. We've talked a little bit about that. It's going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, half diminished. So it's from there, it's going to be major, minor, minor, then it's going to go major, major, minor, and then it's going to go up to this. That's going to be a half diminished chord on that sharp F. And those concepts, that concept of being able to play those basic chords are the basic chords most other chords are built upon in major keys. And that concept transposes to any key, the tonal chords that can be played in what position at what interval. You're playing in G and you're going, well, what chords can be played from that interval? Played well, sixths or ninths or sevenths, or major or minor, diminished, half diminished, sus chords, things like that. And that basically helps the foundation of the key, and a lot of what the key is built for, to be able to play in key, to have some structure. And we've talked about key, the basic major scale and the basic minor scale are basic building blocks that somebody has asked me before. They'd be like, well, what about just I play by ear and whatever I want to? Well, for hundreds of years, they've been trying to write things out like this, so that things that sounded consonant or dissonant, that, that just doesn't sound good played together, at that time period. In different time periods, that different things were acceptable, consonant or dissonant, what sounded good and what didn't to them, and different opinions of what sounded good and what didn't. So, those were the foundations of what all this stuff was built for anyway. So they're foundations to work from, and that's what keys are for. And we talked about leaving key, borrowing chords, or modulating. We talked a little bit about that, and we'll get into that more a little bit later on. But that's the basic concepts we want to deal with. So when you're dealing with key, that it's a good idea to just start practicing these things that I've talked about and trying to remember that, and working with that, and visually, reviewing it and reviewing it and reviewing it until you're very familiar with what the key signature is and what that means. And the basic concepts that are happening in key that you understand. And the other concept we're talking about is if you're playing in key, and you're playing in G here, and you go along and you decide to play a G minor for some reason. For some reason, your composition's got a G minor in it. So if you're playing a G minor in the key of C, what's going to happen there? Some notes are going to get sharped or flat, that aren't the key signature, so you're going to have to mark them. So it's a really good understanding of, you can really quickly visualize that that these notes are going to be flat in this key, or we'll just go back to here. You're going to know the F is going to be sharp. So when you're looking at the you're looking at the composition. Anytime you're seeing an F sharp, you know it's still in the key of F, so it's not throwing you for a loop trying to figure out the sharp of F, because you just know automatically it is going to be. And anytime you see other sharps or flats that aren't just that sharp or flat, that it's a borrowed chord, it's an non-harmonic tone that's been borrowed or used as part of a chord or part of a melody that's not in key, and to, you know, so that you can catch it, you know, and go, whoa, that's a borrowed chord, and understand it is. And just the concept of that, it's a learning thing also, because you all of a sudden see this other sharps or flats that are being used in this composition, and it's like, well, that's something that they felt sounded consonant and sounded good, but it's not in that key, because it's not like a hard set rule that you have to just play in key and the notes in key. That sometimes you're going to think that something sounds good, that's notes that aren't in that scale and that key, but you have to mark them, and those are things that are acceptable as long as it's marked and you understand you're not in the strict theory of following the key of G, that you've left that key temporarily for something that you think sounds good, or the composer of the piece that you are learning or playing thought that sounded good, you know, which is all a matter of opinion. You know, I mean, it's nowadays, it's like you listen to some experimental music and be like, it sounds like crap, bro. It sounds like you stepped on your dog, threw him in a garbage can with the cat and lit him on fire, you know, and it's like, but, you know, to them, it sounds cool. They're having fun, and to them, it's consonant. And I mean, nowadays, there can be a lot of music like that. You know, a lot of whole classical may not be that way, but, you know, some music forms can get that way. So, you know, those are the basic concepts we wanted to talk about, and we've covered most of those. I do recommend you download this from Doc's Music Theory Lab, and it's got this all written on there, and you can take some time to study this and understand. I do suggest you get online and look at some things about using writing key signatures out for exotic scales or exotic keys, so you can get familiar with some of the ways those might be notated. I've seen them notated a lot of different ways, and basically I go to the beginning of the staff and I go, is there something funky going on there, you know, and I try to decipher whatever the heck they've done, because they may have understood their notation well, or they may not have. They may use strict form, they may not have. So it's normally a matter of going to figure out what exactly they did, you know. I mean, did they understand how to write that out, or did they use something they thought up in their head because they weren't really familiar with it? And exotic keys may not be used a lot, and most of the time in Western music, they'll fall back on major or minor keys. The major keys are the relative minors, and sometimes, you know, getting jazz, that it'll be melodic minor scales, and sometimes it'll be different for ascending and descending. So you'll be going along in the key, and all of a sudden they'll have it marked for this passage when the progression is going up, you know, and the progression is moving higher in frequency, meaning the levels they're going up. And, you know, and then all of a sudden the key signature change when they're going down, because they're using a different key signature when they're ascending and a different key signature when they're descending. So, you know, just like going on the keyboard, I mean, a simple understand that is if I'm going from C major to D minor to E minor playing in the key of C, I'm going up. And if I go from C major to A minor to G major, I'm moving down. I'm moving in the opposite direction. So as soon as I started moving in a different direction, that the key signature would be different, because they're basically using like two different scales in that. Those kind of things can be very complicated, but as long as you understand that's possibly what's happening. Or if they've changed keys, sometimes you'd be cruising along and all of a sudden you see something like this, and you're going, what happened there? It's like, well, he changed key. All of a sudden over here he was playing in C and there's no key signature. You know, we talked about no sharps or flats, so he's playing in C, and all of a sudden, bam, whoa, what's happening? Well, he just changed key signature. And so he'd go and be back to here, and he'd natural everything, it's back to the key of C. And you know, it's natural. Either that, or you've changed key again, and you'd have a whole new set of a key signature there right in the middle of your staff as you're going along. And that's very simple to understand. And like I had said, as we go through there, you may see that happen a lot of times going along there. But, you know, you come back and you understand what key that is. Here's one of those funky things. This is C sharp. You come to here, and the next half step above it is C, But so you'd think it's C natural. Well, it's not. It's C sharp. And that's one of those tricky ones because it's marked C sharp, but that's the key signature written for it. So you kind of want to familiarize yourself with those. But that's basically the understanding of that. And we've basically covered most of that. I'm not really thinking of much else that we really need to address as far as the keys. Most other concepts you're going to be dealing with are going to be exotic keys, and I would say that you're not going to be dealing with that right now, and don't focus on that too much. One things I tell people when I'm teaching them beginning music is, stay away from really super advanced concepts until you're really familiar with some of the basic ones. It's like some of the basic concepts that I'll get into very complex things sometimes, and I'll walk away from all the basic concepts for a long time because I'll get wandering around, in some kind of thing I'm doing, but it's the basic concepts that are going to lead you to that kind of thing, to where, one day you're going to understand the basic concepts well enough to where you might walk away from a whole lot of them to do whatever you want to do. That's going to be something you use a lot on your staff paper and in your composing and things like that. That's going to take precedence of a lot of other things. And that sounds funny to some people that, doing classical and things like that. But sometimes experimental music and heavy jazz and some things can just lead you off into some very exotic forms of composition. But I wouldn't worry about that too much right at the moment. So I think we basically covered that. And if you go back and watch those other videos about basic key and what that is and playing in key, those are some of the first basic concepts we looked at the beginning of the videos on this channel. And I just wanted to go over it again on the staff so that that we already talked about it on the staff when we talked about what it means, but just so that when you're visual on the staff, it isn't any really different than what we talked about before. And we already talked about so far in this video how to create key signatures, how to find the key signature, what's going on if you see sharps or flat signs along that aren't in the key signature, or natural signs and things like that. And we talked a little bit about how you deal with those things, relative major and minors, and we talked about some exotic scales, and that's something you really need to look into. I wouldn't worry about that too much for now, because you will find that more than likely with basic scales you can probably get done most of what you want to do with borrowing notes and chords. Every now and then you might get into something like a harmonic minor or melodic minor. You really get into some jazz kind of stuff. But you're not going to be doing that until you get a little bit more advanced. Unless you just directly know that's what you're getting into, then you really need to study that in all aspects of how that works and how it looks on staff paper and how it looks in how it functions and how it's written, how you compose with it, and any things that might be coming along that aren't normally on a staff paper, and what kind of notation they might be using in that specific style or genre of music to dictate and to display and let the reader know what's going on in that type of genre, and special markings that may be associated with things that genre does, typically, on a regular basis. So I hope you enjoyed the series, and I hope now that you can see that on your staff paper, and I hope that you practice writing out the keys. You've downloaded this, you're sitting there with your piano, and you're practicing writing out the keys. You're practicing creating some keys, you're practicing finding some keys, downloading some scores, and looking at the keys, looking around the internet, and and reviewing it, setting yourself up some kind of schedule so that you can look at the keys and understand what's happening with them, and become very familiar with the keys, how they're created, how to find them, what their purpose is, how to use them, and how to know when things change as the score moves along with new keys being added, or finding sharps and flats that aren't in the key, or things that are being naturaled, or how they're getting back into key by resharping it after they've naturaled it, so that the reader knows that they've gone back to key, and things like that. Simple concepts like that. So I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next video when we talk about rhythm.